It was supposed to be a quiet, perfect evening, the kind that settles into your bones and reminds you that everything is finally, securely, okay. I had decided to surprise my husband, Mark, with his favorite dinner. The scent of garlic and rosemary from the roasting lamb filled our small kitchen, a warm, savory cloud that I hoped would greet him the moment he walked through the door. I had spent the afternoon meticulously preparing everything: creamy Parmesan polenta, honey-glazed carrots, and a bottle of the expensive Cabernet he loved but would never buy for himself. The table was set with our wedding china, the plates we saved for special occasions, because I had a feeling this night was the beginning of one. After years of watching my own family implode under the weight of my father's bad decisions, I had finally found my safe harbor in Mark. He was steady, kind, and predictable in the best possible way. He was the man who had pulled me from the wreckage of my past and built a fortress of love and stability around me. I had been at the grocery store, picking out the freshest rack of lamb, when the idea struck me. I'd grab a few extra things, some artisanal cheese, a dark chocolate torte, and be home well before he was. I wanted him to walk into a home that smelled of comfort, a meal that spoke of love, a wife who was just happy to see him. I pictured the look on his face, that soft smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, the one that always made me feel like the only person in the room. I let myself into the house quietly, balancing the grocery bags against my hip as I fumbled with the key. I was so lost in my happy thoughts that I didn't register the voices at first. They were low, coming from the living room, a hushed, serious conversation that felt instantly out of place in our normally peaceful home. One voice was Mark's. The other voice made my blood run cold. It was my father. My dad, Robert, never just dropped by. His visits were always preceded by a string of urgent, apologetic texts, usually culminating in a request for money he swore he'd pay back. But this felt different. There was no desperation in his tone, just a quiet finality. I set the grocery bags down on the floor of the entryway, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. I crept silently down the hallway, my socked feet making no sound on the polished hardwood floors. I peeked around the corner, my body hidden by the tall fiddle-leaf fig we'd bought on our first anniversary. And that's when I saw it. Mark was standing with his back to me, but I could see his arm extended. In his hand was a thick white envelope. My father took it, his movements quick and furtive, like a man who knew he was doing something wrong. He didn't even open it. He just slid it into the inside pocket of his worn leather jacket. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe Mark was helping him with another unlucky streak. Maybe it was a loan, a gift, another secret bailout I wasn't supposed to know about. But then I heard the words that shattered not just my evening, but my entire world. "This is the last payment, Robert," Mark said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "As we agreed, the full 5 years. The contract is fulfilled." My father nodded, his face a mask of grim relief. "She never suspected a thing, did she?" he asked, a slight tremor in his voice. Mark let out a short, hollow laugh that wasn't his at all. "Clara trusts me. She thinks I'm the man who saved her." He turned then, and I saw his face. It was a stranger's face, cold and unreadable. "You got your money, the debt is paid. Now you stay away, just like we planned." The grocery bags I'd left in the hall suddenly felt a million miles away. The smell of rosemary and garlic turned sour in my stomach. A contract, a debt, 5 years. Our entire marriage, our entire life, had been a business transaction. And I, the loving wife preparing a surprise dinner, was the commodity that had just been paid in full. Before Mark, my life was a constant state of bracing for impact. I grew up in a house where the foundation was perpetually cracked, not by arguments or anger, but by the quiet, relentless erosion of my father's failures. Robert wasn't a bad man, not in the way people usually mean. He was just weak, a dreamer who chased get-rich-quick schemes with the desperate optimism of a man who believed his big break was always just around the corner. It never was. Instead, there were bad investments, unlucky streaks at the track, and business partners who cheated him. My mother, Helen, was his loyal, long-suffering enabler. She'd wring her hands, her face etched with worry, and whisper, "Your father just has bad luck, Clara. We have to support him." Support in our family meant I was the one who got a job at 16 to help with the bills. It meant my college fund, a small account my grandmother had started for me, was drained to cover a temporary shortfall. It meant I learned to read the signs of an impending crisis, the way Dad would avoid my gaze, the hushed, late-night phone calls, the sudden appearance of new, unfamiliar men at our front door demanding to speak with him. I met Mark during the worst of it. I was 24, working 2 jobs, and barely keeping my head above water while trying to finish my degree online. My father's gambling had escalated, and the friendly warnings had turned into explicit threats. One evening, a man with a broken nose and eyes like chips of ice showed up and told my father he had 1 week to pay back $20,000. I spent that night on the phone, begging for extensions, crying, feeling the world close in on me. That weekend, I was at a cafe, trying to study for a final, when my hands started shaking so badly I couldn't hold my pen. A man at the next table noticed. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. It was Mark. I don't know why, but I told him everything. I poured out years of frustration, fear, and shame to a complete stranger. He just listened, his expression calm and steady. He didn't pity me, he didn't judge. When I was done, he simply said, "Let me help." He was an architect, successful and established, a world away from the chaotic instability I knew. He told me he'd been raised to believe that good people help each other. He offered to loan my father the money. He insisted on handling the transaction himself, saying he didn't want me involved in the ugly side of things. I remember the overwhelming sense of relief, so powerful it made me dizzy. He paid the debt. The men with cold eyes disappeared. My father, humbled and grateful, promised he was done with it all. For the first time in my life, I could breathe. Mark and I started dating. It was a whirlwind. He was everything my father wasn't: responsible, honest, and protective. He took me to nice restaurants, listened to my dreams of opening a small catering business, and encouraged me to quit my second job and focus on my passion. He made me feel safe. He made me feel seen. When he proposed a year later, with a simple, elegant diamond ring, it felt like the final scene in a fairy tale. I was being rescued. Our marriage was, on the surface, perfect. Mark insisted on managing our finances. "You've had enough stress with money to last a lifetime," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "Let me take care of it. Just focus on your cooking." I was so grateful, so in love, that I never questioned it. He was incredibly generous with my parents, always sending them money for birthdays and holidays, paying for a new roof on their house, buying my mother a new car when hers broke down. I thought it was just his kind heart. I saw it as proof of his love for me, an extension of his desire to erase all the hardship from my past. He subtly encouraged me to see them less. "I don't want you getting dragged back into their drama, honey," he'd say. "You deserve peace." I thought he was protecting me. I never once considered that he was isolating me, managing his investment, ensuring the commodity he'd purchased remained untainted by its messy origins, ensuring that, looking back, the signs were all there, disguised as love and protection. The man who saved me was also the man who had bought me. The shame of my family's financial situation was a cloak I'd worn for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like to stand in the sun. My father's problem wasn't just bad luck. It was a sickness, a compulsive need to risk everything for the fleeting thrill of a potential win. He was a ghost in our own home, present in body, but his mind always elsewhere, calculating odds, replaying losses, planning the next big bet that would solve everything. My mother orbited his chaos, her life a series of damage control maneuvers. She'd intercept mail with red past due stamps, lie to relatives about why we couldn't make it to family gatherings, and perfect the art of the brave, weary smile. Her mantra was, "We don't air our dirty laundry, Clara." So, we didn't. We folded it neatly and hid it in the back of the closet, pretending the smell of decay wasn't seeping through the door. My role in this silent drama was that of the reluctant savior. When I was in high school, I came home from my waitressing job one night to find my mother crying in the kitchen. She'd found a shoebox full of pawnshop receipts under my father's side of the bed. He had sold her mother's wedding ring, his own father's watch, and a silver locket I'd been given for my christening. "He promised he wouldn't," she sobbed into her hands. He promised. I remember standing there, my apron still smelling of fried onions and coffee, and feeling a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. I took my entire week's pay, $112 in cash and crumpled tips, and placed it on the table. "Here," I said. "It's not much, but it's a start." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, and for a second I saw not gratitude, but a flicker of something else. Relief that the burden had found a new pair of shoulders to rest on. That night set the precedent for the next decade. Every crisis became my crisis. I was the one who learned how to negotiate with credit card companies, how to stretch a grocery budget until it screamed, how to smile through family holidays knowing that the festive cheer was funded by my second job. I became an expert at reading my father. I knew the hollow look in his eyes that meant he'd lost big. I knew the forced, manic cheerfulness that meant he'd won a little and was about to risk it all again. And through it all, they spoke of love. "We love you so much, Clara," my mother would say, hugging me tightly after I'd just handed over my rent money to stop an eviction notice. "I don't know what we'd do without you." The words were meant to be a comfort, but they felt like chains. When Mark came into the picture, it was like someone had finally handed me the key. He didn't just offer money, he offered an exit. He was so different, so solid. When he met my parents, he was polite but firm. He treated my father with a kind of detached sympathy that I mistook for respect. He looked at my mother's anxious fluttering and seemed to understand it without being drawn in. He represented everything I craved: order, calm, and a life where the phone ringing didn't automatically trigger a spike of adrenaline. He was my escape plan. I loved him for it, deeply and without reservation. He was the hero of my story. It never occurred to me to ask what he was getting out of the arrangement. Why would a man that successful, that put together, want to tie himself to my family's sinking ship? I thought it was because he loved me that much. The truth I see now was far more transactional. He wasn't saving me from my father, he was simply taking over the debt. After Mark and my father finished their hushed exchange, I retreated back to the entryway, my mind a swirling vortex of noise and disbelief. I snatched the grocery bags from the floor and scurried into the kitchen, my movements stiff and robotic. I had to act normal. If he knew I'd overheard the entire charade, his charade, the one that had defined my life for 5 years, would be over. And I wasn't ready. I needed time. I needed to understand the full scope of the lie. The sound of the front door closing made me jump. A moment later, Mark walked into the kitchen, a perfect, loving smile already arranged on his face. "Hey, honey, sorry, I just saw your dad out front. He was just dropping something off." He leaned in to kiss me, and I had to force myself not to recoil. His lips felt cold against my skin. "Something smells amazing," he said, peering at the oven. "Were you planning a surprise?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and managed a weak smile. "Your favorite," I whispered, my voice sounding thin and foreign to my own ears. The meal that was supposed to be a celebration of our love now felt like a prop in a twisted play. Every action was a performance. I arranged the glazed carrots on a platter, my hands trembling so slightly I prayed he wouldn't notice. I poured him a glass of the expensive wine, the deep red liquid swirling like a pool of blood. He sat at the table, talking about his day at the architecture firm, some issue with a blueprint, a difficult client. I nodded and made the appropriate sounds of interest, but his words were just a low hum in the background of my own screaming thoughts. A contract. The debt is paid. She trusts me. Each phrase was a hammer blow against the fortress of security I thought he'd built for me. "You're quiet tonight," he observed, cutting into a piece of lamb. "Everything okay?" I looked up, meeting his eyes across the candlelight. The man I was looking at wasn't my husband. He was an actor, and a very good one. He had played the part of the devoted, protective partner for 5 years without ever breaking character. I was his greatest performance. Just tired, I lied, pushing the polenta around on my plate. Long day. The food, so carefully prepared, tasted like ash in my mouth. I couldn't swallow. My stomach churned with a mixture of nausea and rage. He had bought me. My father had sold me. And for 5 years, I had been the happy, clueless wife, decorating our home, planning our future, loving a man whose affection came with a price tag. He reached across the table and took my hand. His touch felt like a brand. "You know I love you, right, Clara?" he said, his thumb stroking my knuckles. "More than anything." The sincerity in his voice was terrifying. Did he believe his own lie? Or was this just part of the deal, one final reassurance to the asset he'd acquired? I pulled my hand back gently. "I know," I whispered. I couldn't bear it for another second. "I think I'm going to head to bed early. I have a bit of a headache." His face clouded with concern, another perfectly executed expression. "Of course, honey. Do you need anything? Some aspirin? A glass of water?" "No, I'll be fine," I said, standing up on shaky legs. "Don't let the dinner go to waste." I walked out of the dining room, leaving him there with the flickering candles and the beautiful, meaningless meal. I didn't go to our bedroom. I went into the guest bathroom, locked the door, and sank to the cold tile floor. I pressed my hands over my mouth to stifle the sob that was clawing its way up my throat. My perfect evening was a lie. My marriage was a lie. My rescue was a cage. And I had just realized the door had been locked from the outside all along. Sleep was an impossibility. I lay in our bed, stiff as a board, listening to the sound of Mark's steady breathing beside me. It was the same sound that had soothed me to sleep for 5 years, a rhythmic reminder of his stable presence. Tonight, it sounded like the ticking of a time bomb. My mind was a frantic landscape of replayed conversations and re-examined memories, each one now tainted with the poison of the truth. His generosity, his protection, his insistence on handling our money. It wasn't love. It was control. It was asset management. I had to know more. I needed to see the proof, to hold the lie in my hands. Around 3 a.m., when I was sure he was in a deep sleep, I slipped out of bed. The house was dark and silent as I crept down the stairs to his home office. It was the one room in the house that was exclusively his. He'd always said it was to keep his work clutter from spilling into our life, another gesture I'd mistaken for consideration. Now I knew it was a vault. The door was unlocked. I switched on the small desk lamp, casting a pool of yellow light across the room. The space was impeccably organized, just like Mark himself. Pens were in their holder, papers were in neat stacks, books were arranged by size. I started with the desk drawers, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The first 2 drawers held nothing but stationery and architectural tools, but the bottom drawer, the deep one, was locked. My stomach sank. Of course it was. I scanned the room, my eyes searching for anything. A hidden key, a note with a combination. Then I remembered. A few months ago, he'd lost his main set of keys and had used a spare that he kept taped to the underside of the top shelf of the bookcase. He'd told me about it, laughing at his own forgetfulness. Just in case of emergency, he'd said. This was an emergency. My fingers trembled as I reached up, feeling along the rough wood of the shelf. There it was. A small, cold metal key held in place by a strip of electrical tape. I pulled it free and knelt before the desk. The key slid into the lock and turned with a soft, satisfying click. I pulled the drawer open slowly. Inside were dozens of files, all neatly labeled: taxes, insurance, mortgage. And then I saw it. A single manila folder tucked at the very back, with one word written on the tab in Mark's precise, architectural script. Robert. I lifted it out, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. I opened it on the desk. Inside was not just a collection of receipts or loan notes, it was a formal, notarized document. A contract. My breath hitched. It was dated 1 week before our wedding. The terms were laid out in cold, legal language. Mark would assume and pay off a debt of $250,000 owed by Robert to a list of creditors. In exchange, Robert agreed to facilitate and bless the union, between Mark and his daughter, Clara. The contract stipulated a payment plan over 60 months, 5 years, with the final installment due on the date of our 5th anniversary, which was next week. There was a clause about confidentiality and another stating that Robert would cede all parental financial claims and limit contact to pre-approved occasions. He hadn't just paid off a debt. He had purchased my life, my time, my trust, and my father had signed the bill of sale. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent, dripping onto the cruel black and white print. I had the proof. The lie was no longer a whisper in the dark. It was a legally binding document. The next morning, feigning a migraine, I drove to my best friend Sarah's apartment. The moment she opened the door and saw my face, she pulled me inside. I handed her the photocopies I'd made of the contract. As she read, her expression shifted from confusion to horror, then to pure, unadulterated rage. "That son of a bitch," she whispered, looking up at me. "We are going to burn his entire world to the ground." And for the first time since I'd heard those words in the living room, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt the first spark of a fire being lit. "You can't just confront him," Sarah said, pacing her small living room like a general planning a military campaign. She had a cup of steaming tea in one hand and the photocopied contract in the other, which she waved in the air for emphasis. "He'll lie. He'll twist it. He'll make you sound crazy. He's been doing it for 5 years. He's a professional." She was right. A direct confrontation would only lead to more gaslighting, more carefully constructed excuses. I had spent years being managed by his calm, rational tone, a tone that could make me doubt my own perceptions. I couldn't let that happen again. I needed to do this on my terms, in a way that left no room for denial. "His greatest weapon is the illusion that he's the good guy," I said, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. "The savior, the stable, loving husband who rescued the poor girl from her messy family." "So," Sarah said, stopping in front of me, her eyes glinting, "we let him think the illusion is still working. We let him walk right into a trap of his own making." An idea began to form, cold and sharp in the center of my chest. "Our anniversary," I whispered. "It's next Tuesday, the day the contract is fulfilled." Sarah's lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. "Oh, that's perfect. It's poetic." The plan was audacious, and it terrified me, but it was also the only way. I would throw him a surprise anniversary party. Not a big one, just an intimate dinner. Just the 4 of us, me, Mark, and my parents. I would invite them to celebrate the 5-year milestone that marked my sale and his final payment. I would play the part of the devoted, happy wife, completely oblivious, celebrating our love while they were secretly celebrating the conclusion of their sordid business deal. The thought of it made my stomach churn. But the alternative, a quiet, private implosion where they could control the narrative, was unthinkable. The next few days were a masterclass in deception. I moved through my life like a spy in my own home. I was nauseous with anxiety, but on the outside, I was the picture of a woman excitedly planning a special occasion. I called my mother. "Hi, Mom. I was thinking, since it's our 5th anniversary on Tuesday, I'd love for you and Dad to come over for a special dinner. Just us." Her voice on the other end was a symphony of feigned delight. "Oh, Clara, that's wonderful. Of course, we'd love to. 5 years! It's gone by so fast." I could almost hear the relief in her tone, the satisfaction of a job well done. She thought I was celebrating our marriage. She was really celebrating her own freedom from her husband's debts. I told Mark that night, feigning a shy, hopeful smile. "I invited Mom and Dad for dinner on Tuesday to celebrate. Is that okay?" He wrapped his arms around me, his embrace feeling like a cage. "That's perfect, honey," he said, his voice full of that false warmth he wielded so expertly. "Whatever makes you happy." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. He was holding me, telling me he loved me, all while knowing that our anniversary was the finish line of a financial agreement. I planned the menu with meticulous, almost manic detail. I chose all their favorite foods, a standing rib roast for my father, who loved a showy cut of meat, scalloped potatoes for my mother, her ultimate comfort food, And for Mark, a rich dark chocolate lava cake, the first dessert I ever made for him. Every dish was a carefully chosen symbol, a piece of the life I thought we had built, a life that was about to be served up as evidence. Sarah was my co-conspirator, my anchor. She called me every night. "How's the performance going?" she'd ask. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I'd lie, my voice steady while my insides felt like they were being shredded. "I just keep focusing on Tuesday." The days leading up to the dinner were the longest of my life. I smiled, I laughed, I cooked. I played the part of Clara, the trusting wife. But underneath, a different Clara was waiting. She was cold, she was clear-eyed, and she was counting down the hours until the curtain finally fell. The evening of our anniversary, the air in the house was thick with unspoken truths. I had spent the entire day cooking, moving through the kitchen with a chilling sense of purpose. The scent of the roasting meat and bubbling cheese was a stark contrast to the ice that had formed in my veins. I wore a simple black dress, elegant and understated, funeral attire for the death of my marriage. Elegant. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath and pasted a bright, welcoming smile on my face. My parents stood on the doorstep, my mother clutching a bouquet of store-bought lilies, my father beaming with the carefree relief of a man whose debts were finally settled. "Happy anniversary, you two!" my mother chirped, hugging me in a way that felt both brittle and possessive. Mark came up behind me, placing a hand on the small of my back. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "We're so glad you could be here to celebrate with us." The four of us sat in the living room, making small talk. They asked about my catering business. I asked about their garden. We were all actors in a play, delivering our lines with practiced ease, the dark, ugly script hidden just beneath the surface. We moved to the dining room, the table aglow with candlelight, a perfect picture of familial bliss. I served the meal, my hands steady. Mark carved the roast, playing the part of the proud husband and host. My father praised the food effusively. My mother recounted a story from our wedding day. The conversation was a masterpiece of denial, a carefully woven tapestry of lies and omissions. I let them talk. I let them drink the expensive wine Mark had opened. I watched them, my expression one of serene contentment, while inside, I was a coiled spring. Finally, after the main course was cleared, Mark stood, raising his glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, smiling at me with eyes full of counterfeit affection. "To Clara, my beautiful, loving, and trusting wife. These past 5 years have been the best of my life. I can't imagine it without you." My parents clapped softly, their faces glowing. My father met Mark's eyes over the rim of his glass in a look of silent, mutual understanding. It was a look between two men who had just concluded a successful transaction. I let the moment hang in the air for a beat. Then I stood up, picking up my own glass. "Thank you, honey. That's so sweet," I said, my voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that mirrored his own. "I'd like to make a toast, too." I paused, letting their expectant smiles settle. Then, I reached for the simple decorative folder I had placed beside my plate. I actually found something the other day that I thought was so fitting for tonight. A little piece of our history. I opened the folder and pulled out the crisp, photocopied pages of the contract. I held up the first page. "It's a contract," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the cozy atmosphere like a shard of glass. "It's dated exactly 5 years and 1 week ago, and it seems to involve all three of you." The smiles on their faces froze, then melted away, replaced by identical masks of confusion and dawning horror. I looked directly at my father. "It details a debt of $250,000. I then turned to Mark. "And it outlines a very specific payment plan, in exchange for my hand in marriage. The final payment, it seems, was due today." The silence in the room was absolute, a crushing weight. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's face went ashen. Mark just stared at me, his mask finally, irrevocably, shattered. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. "So, I'd like to toast to the fulfillment of our contract. Tell me, was I a good investment?" The aftermath of my question was not a loud explosion, but a slow, silent implosion. The color drained from Mark's face, leaving him looking hollowed out under the warm candlelight. My father seemed to shrink in his chair, his bravado vanishing, replaced by the familiar, craven look of a man who'd been caught. Vanishing. My mother was the first to break, letting out a small, strangled sob. Clara, we. It wasn't like that, she stammered, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to reassemble the lie. Your father was in trouble. Mark was helping us. He loves you. I held up the contract, my hand perfectly steady. Does love come with a 60-month payment plan and a confidentiality clause, Mom? Was this help, or was it a bill of sale? I looked at Mark, who was still frozen, his mouth slightly agape. You built our entire life on a lie. Every I love you, every vacation, every anniversary gift. Was that just you protecting your investment? He finally found his voice, but it was weak, a pale imitation of his usual confident tone. Clara, you have to understand. I did love you. The moment I met you, I wanted to save you. You didn't save me, I said, my voice dropping to a low, intense whisper that filled the suddenly vast space between us. You bought me. You put a price on my head to settle my father's gambling debts, and then you isolated me, managed me, and pretended it was protection. You didn't want a wife. You wanted an asset clear of its liabilities. I turned my gaze back to my parents. And you. You sold your own daughter. You took his money and smiled at my wedding, knowing you had traded me for your own financial security. You are not my parents. You are my creditors. And as of tonight, it seems the debt is paid. I placed the contract down on the table with a soft thud that echoed like a gavel. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was a loud enough weapon. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I've already packed a bag. It's by the front door. Mark shot up from his seat. Clara, wait. We can talk about this. We can fix this. There is nothing to fix, I replied, walking away from the table, from the beautiful meal, from the 5 years of carefully curated deception. A foundation built on lies can't be repaired. It can only be demolished. I walked out of the house without looking back. I didn't need to see their faces. I didn't need to hear their pathetic, last-ditch excuses. I got in my car and drove to Sarah's, the only real home I had at that moment. The next day, my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman Sarah had recommended, filed for divorce. Mark's attempts to talk it out were met with cold, formal correspondence. When he realized I wouldn't be swayed by his empty apologies, he tried to fight, claiming the house and all the assets were his. But the contract, which my lawyer gleefully submitted as evidence of fraud and emotional distress, dismantled his case before it even began. The court saw it for what it was, a business arrangement masquerading as a marriage. It's been a year now. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago. I got more than a fair settlement, enough to finally start the small catering business I'd always dreamed of. It's called The Honest Table. It's a small victory, but it's mine. I live in a modest apartment on the other side of town, filled with mismatched furniture and the warm, genuine smell of baking bread. I haven't spoken to my parents. They tried to call, to send letters filled with a toxic blend of guilt and blame, but I returned them all, unopened. They made their choice the day they put a price on me. Mark, I heard, sold the house. He's still a successful architect, but friends say something in him is broken, that the charming, confident man they knew is gone. I feel no satisfaction in that, only a quiet, sad finality. Sometimes when I'm kneading dough late at night, I think about him. I don't hate him. I don't love him. I simply see him for what he was. A man so afraid of messy, genuine connection that he had to purchase a perfect, controllable version of it instead. He didn't rescue me. In the end, I had to rescue myself. And I did. Rescue me. I walked out of that perfect house, away from that perfect man, and into the beautifully imperfect, honest chaos of my own life. And I have never felt more free.